Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Legendarium podcast. Please visit thelegendarium.com to check out our wares. Go to Patreon, Discord. All that is through there, thelegendarium.com. Today, we're dipping back into the author shelf series. The book is Dreamcatcher by Stephen King, and it was selected by our first guest. And the jury's still out on him, but I suspect he's mostly made up of orange spores meant to colonize the entire world. It's author Ryan Van Loan. How you doing, Ryan?
Hey, everyone. Good. You've made my job of taking over the human race a little more difficult, but we'll survive.
Well, that's right. Yeah, exposure is the first step to defeating you. And I can't tell you how glad I am not to share a psychic link with him because, yikes, it's Kenn Johnson.
I thought you were going to say, speaking of exposure, no. But those charges were dropped, thank goodness.
So, Ryan, you are the author of the brand new book that just came out a couple days ago called The Memory in the Blood. And this is part of a series, a conclusion to the series?
It's the final volume in a trilogy called the Fall of the God series.
Okay, all right. So we're going to hear a little bit more about that at the end of the episode, so stick around for that. If you're looking for new reading material, then definitely stick around. But for now, let's talk Dreamcatcher. And don't worry too much about spoilers. I mean, the book is 20 years old, and we'll talk more about why maybe you shouldn't worry too much about spoilers. But let's get into it. Dreamcatcher is a 2001 sci-fi horror novel by Stephen King. It tells the story of four lifelong friends who have been inseparable since middle school, especially since the day they rescued Duddits, a neighborhood boy with Down syndrome, from some seriously sadistic bullying. Not only did they befriend Duddits, but he also imparted to them a special gift, a sort of psychic bond between each other and the world around them. Now they're going to need those gifts because 20 years later, the four friends are on their annual hunting trip when, as is always the case in a cabin, in the woods, in a remote part of the world, in a Stephen King story, things go horribly awry. Angry, toothy worms and an invading, malevolent alien creature attack, bringing death and dismemberment, infection, possession, government quarantine, all the good stuff you want in a novel.
Human
so
sacrifice.
Can the boys figure out what, Ken?
Dogs and cats living together.
Anyway, that's right. Yeah. Can the boys figure out what's going on and stop it before the infection is let loose and ends life on Earth? Yeah, I'm betting they can. So, Ryan, I'm going to ask you the first question I always ask an author shelf guest. Why did you pick this book?
Yeah, it's funny. It's one of the Stephen King novels that gets most panned, I think. And I think King himself a couple of years ago kind of said, in hindsight, wasn't his favorite. He was on painkillers from, that accident that almost killed him and all those things. But it was the first Stephen King book I read. And, I was thinking about, different books that have really influenced my writing. And I was, maybe going to go with like Anne McCaffrey or Robin McKinley or, Jordan or one of the others. But honestly, the whole reason why I'm here, why I'm a writer, is because I read this book. And, King had so much fun on the page. Like, I just had never read a book that just like grabbed you, that like really held you through it. There's definitely some, there's some wrinkles there. It's not all smooth sailing, but for the first King book I read, it made me want to know more. And closely thereafter, I read On Writing. And between that and a couple of other things, kind of made me realize, hey, maybe I can do this whole writing thing. And that's what got me to write my first book, which then got me to write, 6 more. And then that eventually got me a publishing deal. So for all of those reasons, that's why I picked the book. And then, I did a reread before we jumped on here because I haven't read it since, I don't know, I think it was probably back in 2006, 2007, when I read that first book for the first time. And, I can kind of see, and we'll probably get into this, I can totally see why, college age Ryan was really drawn to that. I think there's a lot of stuff that plays to that experience. But so that's why I chose it, because it was the thing that got me excited enough to go from lifelong reader to writer.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think there's something to the idea of, look, it doesn't have to be Stephen King's best work, but it can be something, even if you acknowledge that, it can still be something that is nostalgic, that had an impact on you at just the right time. you come to these things, the right thing at the right time, and it has a huge impact. I mean, I've told the story a million times of going to the theater at 15 years old and seeing the Fellowship of the Ring for the first time. I'd never read The Lord of the Rings, and how it's like a few things kind of funneled me toward that moment that just changed everything, right? And so, yeah, it doesn't have to be the best thing in the world, but those moments are great when they come along. And also, as far as I'm concerned, it's okay to love something, even if not everybody does, including the author. One of my favorite movies is Knowing. I think it was 2008 or 2009. It was
the Nick Cage movie.
Nick Cage, end of the world, apocalyptic thing, and it was kind of ridiculous and weird, and everybody hated it. But me and Roger Ebert really loved it. So, Kenn, how did the book go for you? Oh, sorry. We got a little bit of a delay, so I keep talking over Ryan. Ryan, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if you're with Ebert, you're in good company, although I haven't watched that one, so I might need to go back in the archives and pull it out.
Oh.
It is definitely worth a watch.
We're going to get a lot of people on Discord being like, that is definitely not worth a watch. Kenn, how did it go? How did this book?
It's similar to Dreamcatcher, like you were saying. It's like, it doesn't have to be everybody's favorite, as long as somebody likes it, and there can still be value in it. Ryan and I have something in common. This is my first Stephen King novel as well. And I'm a lot older than college age, but I read a lot of people who panned the book, but honestly, I rather enjoyed at least the first little bit of it. And in total, I enjoyed it. But the first bit of it, for my first Stephen King experience, I thought I can see why people have liked Stephen King as an author for so many years, because it reads. We've talked about how authors tend to write these days very cinematically, as if they're trying to write the movie on the page. I feel like Stephen King writes very much as a storyteller, as an old-time storyteller, somebody who is actually telling you the story. Let me tell you about this time that this thing happened. And so the very first third of this book, I think I'm really enjoying listening to this. I had to read it.
The audiobook?
I had to do the audiobook because I just didn't have time to read 26 hours of page, but it felt very much like an old storyteller telling me a story, and I'm sitting here enraptured in it. And then it kind of bogs down and there it gets kind of muddled, but overall very much enjoyed this story, and I maybe will go back and read more Stephen King, but this I really enjoyed.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, Kenn. I think that first third is so for people who know the story, whether through this or through that immaculate 2003 film, Dreamcatcher.
Still haven't seen it. I need to go see that.
Oh boy, did I watch it last night. No, but if you know the story, it's kind of like once you get up to the possession, who is it? Jonesy gets possessed by the alien demon, whatever possessor thing.
By a gray man.
Yeah, and like right up to there, I was super duper into it. I loved it, kind of. I'm not a writer, but from that writerly perspective, I love seeing the craft that was, that went into his structuring, the POV shifts, how you're talking about writing cinematically, and just the way that he would kind of switch the POV at a crucial moment and then backtrack and then catch up to the previous moment, that previous cliffhanger, and then go forward. And, he structures that really well. Ryan, you said earlier that this was an influential book on you, but it's got its hiccups. Let's actually talk about that, if it's all right. I think we're going to have a lot of good things to say, but what are those hiccups? What are the wrinkles, the things that kind of bog you down?
Yeah, I mean, so Stephen King writes two types of books. He writes books that are amazing, and then he writes books that have amazing parts, and this is the latter. And the reason is mainly due to what Kenn kind of identified there, that the middle, and this is kind of a King trait, he kind of tends to wander. And I think that's partially because he's a discovery writer, and partially because he's Stephen King, so nobody edits him as well as they would if he was, a no-name first book author. And so when he nails it, when, the muse is there, it's just tight from beginning to end. And you're just loving every minute of it. In this case, I think that opening act, and we should come back to this, is a masterclass in craft and writing and how you pull the reader in. And he's doing so many things in a nuanced way that, like now looking back on it, having written so many books myself, I can see all these things. I definitely didn't see it when I read it for the first time, but I can understand kind of the magic tricks he was pulling that grabbed me. But yeah, that middle section, he just, he takes a little bit too long to get to the point of the story. And there's some really interesting, he does a good thing here. He does this with a lot of his stories where he interweaves a present narrative and then kind of a past narrative that impacted and shaped the characters, and that drives what they're doing today. And he kind of tries to have his cake and eat it too. He has this really impactful story about how these four friends met their fifth friend, and how that fifth friend, who is a special needs child, is being bullied, and they rescue him. And in so doing, they form this lifelong impact with this child who grows up with them. And he turns out to be, kind of this very powerful psychic force that imparts part of his powers onto them, and they need it later on. So that's amazing. It's really powerful. Then he tries to tell like a second story of what they did together, and a third story, and those don't necessarily have the same weight, and it kind of takes away and slows things down. The other thing is, I was in the military for 6 years, and King's military folks here, especially in the beginning, are super cliche, not very interesting, kind of like almost, twirling their mustaches as they go. I think in Act 3, he kind of gets back to where he started in Act 1. And that's where we really start to see these folks are interesting now. They're not just like, the caricature of a bad villain. But man, that Act 2 is a little rocky.
There's in the movie, they give Morgan Freeman, he plays like the evil military commander guy. They give Morgan Freeman these ridiculous, and I mean ridiculous, eyebrows. Ryan, have you seen the movie?
I was trying to think back, and I don't think I've ever seen the movie. And I should have watched it before we jumped on here, but I didn't want to ruin it.
Oh no, it's okay. When you said they, they almost twirl their mustaches, I was like, not Morgan Freeman. He's up here on his eyebrows,
twirling his eyebrows.
So no, we might want to talk a little bit about or I might want to talk about the movie a little bit, because I spent $4 renting the damn thing on Amazon. But
I wish you told me. I would have come and we would have popped popcorn, man. I need to see this movie. It's got a great cast.
It was like 10:30 last night. I stayed up way too late, so
which makes a better recording. Honestly, come on.
Yeah, no, okay. So I have no idea where we were. Something about getting bogged down in the second act. Oh no, I was going to say it's that the previous story, the life story informing the current story. That stuff, I would have loved to, we should talk to Scott Lynch about that sometime. He does that really well in his books,
does it
right?
all the time, yeah.
But what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, it would have been great, I think, if he had gotten through all of that by the second act, so that, by the end of the first act, we know where the powers came from. We know who Duddits is. We know what the event was with the bullies and all that stuff. And then just drop it. Okay, now we know who we're dealing with and what their story is, and just go. Because those times in the second act when he pulls back and he goes, "What's the girl that they found, that they rescued?"
Yeah,
where it's just girl. Like, this. All right,
it starts
taking a while.
Yeah, it starts to get muddy, bouncing back and forth, and you start to lose focus a little bit. I agree that would have been good, a good thing to stop earlier. Honestly, I found the stuff in the past to be more compelling. I was really enjoying the dynamic between the friends a little bit more than I was enjoying the suspense and thriller nature of what was going on in the present.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I could have read a whole book
I completely
about
agree.
them growing up.
Well, and I think, some of his best books are like that. Like It is, these friends growing up together. Stand By Me. There's a bunch of
Stand
things.
By Me,
I think
yeah.
it's the kind of found family dynamic that he has going on. That's what pulls you in Act 1. And by, spoilers, by Act 2, he's killed half the friends. And so he's kind of lost that narrative, kind of that character arc in the background, that heart of the story that's pulling us, that's making us care. I think he's trying to win it back with that second story about finding this lost girl, but it doesn't really add anything. I think it would have been more interesting if he had Duddits communicating with them kind of in the background sooner.
Yeah, he kills off two of the buddies, but you get the sense that these are the two less important ones, even from the very beginning. Like we're made to care about Henry and Jonesy. And then the other ones are like, yeah, you're a couple of screw ups. You're a drunk. Your life is a mess, whatever. And so when they die, it's almost like, what did you give us 4 friends just so that we could have 2 for shock value? Yeah. So I get that.
Wasn't it Beaver? He's the first one that dies. Wasn't it he that kind of spearheads everything though? He sets everything into motion back in the past when he confronts the bully.
Yeah.
So it's almost a bummer that he
does.
He goes so quickly in the book, in my opinion. Wouldn't mind getting more from him. But what are you going to do?
I wonder, and so like this is me, the author, analyzing, but I wonder if it's him discovery writing and he didn't know who exactly was gonna be the Jonesy, and I think it was half between Jonesy and Beaver, or he knew it all along, but having Beaver have kind of that stand up and cheer moment in the past. Having him be the first one to go, maybe that really is kind of that gut punch that he was trying to go for, to like let us know, yeah, these are the stakes, like no one's safe.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You guys want a word of the day? Should we do a word of the day? And then we'll change tack a little bit.
Do we have to use the word of the day?
Yeah, no, but I think you need, Ken, I want you to special order word of the day toilet paper, and just every square has this on it. No, it's like way back in
yesterday when it was Prime Day. Come on.
Yeah, well, I'm not sorry. Lord Bezos doesn't get more of your money. I'm sad. Okay. Well, oh yeah, the word of the day came from early in the book. It's when Henry he has a patient on his couch, the guy who's eating himself to death, as he says. And the word is eidetic. 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 And it means, it had me stopping, which I wasn't expecting to necessarily, had me stopping to go check it out. And eidetic memory is, it's relating to or denoting mental images having unusual vividness and detail, as if actually visible. So it sounds like a photographic memory, but it's not as long-term as a photographic memory. This was new to me. So there you go, everybody. Word of the day.
It's what people commonly refer to as a photographic memory. They get the two mixed up quite a bit.
Apparently they are different. So
yeah.
Okay.
Look at that. I knew something that Craig didn't.
Congratulations, Ken.
There we go. It happens once.
You win the eepisode. All right. So let's get to writing style, and I mean like prose style. And how you guys feel about that? We talked about the structure a little bit. We talked about the POV shifts and that sort of thing. But what about the kind of line by line? Because this was much like Ken, and probably to a lot of people's surprise, this was also my first Stephen King book. It's one of those things. I've got a couple King books that are on my TBR, my to be read list. But when you run a book podcast for the better part of a decade, things inevitably get pushed away forever. So yeah, this is my first Stephen King book. And I really quite enjoyed his style, but Ryan, let me kick it to you and ask you, is there anything from his style specifically that you try to emulate yourself, or that you just enjoy as a reader?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think, so he always does this really good, and it's difficult to pull off. And I don't typically choose this for my openings, because I think that the readership of today has shifted in our expectations, referring back to the beginning, talking about like cinematic writing and things like that. But he rarely starts with like an immediate action. He typically starts with a character who's reacting to something, and it's kind of that shift from reaction to action. And he just does this really, in the prose, he does a great job of getting us inside that character's head right away. So even though they're reactive, which normally would not be the way you want to start a book, we're kind of hooked in, and he's always really tight inside of people's heads. Even when he's head hopping, we're immediately inside this character's skin. They're fully realized. We're seeing everything through them. That's definitely something in my writing that I think has influenced it. That callback to the past, I am a huge sucker for that. I know we're talking about structure now, not necessarily about the prose itself, but that's found its way into my writing. I mean, I don't know that I would claim to have King's prose style, because there's only one Stephen King, but I do think that, he has a way with, I think the one thing that I talked about at the very beginning, and what I try to have in my writing, is you can feel the energy, and you can almost feel how much joy and fun he's having sentence by sentence, especially in the beginning. It's just boom, 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 SSDD, like all these different things. The way that he has Jonesy, the first, I think after the intro, they have chapter 1, and like the first line is Jonesy saying, "Man, I regret not killing this hunter when I see him," sort of thing. And then, that's a pretty informative thing. But then the next thing you know, like he's meeting the hunter, it's in the background, he's already moved on, and he's kind of buried the lead by having us in the minutia of this hunter who's stumbling through. And again, all through Jonesy's thoughts, and Jonesy's thinking a million different things. He's thinking about his leg hurting him. He's thinking about, not really being into hunting. He's thinking about all these different things. And by the time we come back around to that hunter who kicks everything off because he's got this, weasel inside of him, we've kind of forgotten it, and then it smacks us again. But there's that callback because we did read it, and so we remember it. And so there's a lot of stuff that's going on there below the surface that he has, 3 or 4 things in every scene that are going on from the character's perspective. And I think King is great at grounding us in that character voice, and that's where the strength of the prose comes from, I think.
Yeah, there's one thing that you said, he gets into the characters' heads really effortlessly, and thus gets us into the characters' heads effortlessly. And there's one thing that he does that I noticed that I don't see a lot of authors doing, or maybe being allowed to do. It might get edited out of some people. Like you said, Stephen King, he turns in a book, and they might give it a light pass, but they're not gonna tear apart a Stephen King book. And that is parentheticals. So let me give you just a little example. This is, it's a nothing example, but this sort of thing happens all the time in the book. Let's see. As well as that first beer of the day, Pete is waiting for November. Going to Washington in April had been good, and the moon rocks had been stunning. They still stun him every time he thinks about them. But he had been alone. And that bit, they still stun him every time he thinks about them. That's in parentheses. And it's something you don't get to see very often, but that's kind of how our brain works. Or maybe I'm a mutant. That's fine. But I feel like that we kind of go on these little parenthetical side routes in our thoughts a lot. And it's just a little thing that I wish I saw more in prose style. These internal parentheticals, I really liked that about his stuff.
I think you like them because it's the nature of our podcast to go on to parentheticals. In fact, that's what we should call them. Parentheticals. No more tangents. We're going on a parenthetical now.
Rework the wheel of tangents just with parentheses all around it. Yeah.
Wheel of parentheticals.
Get on board with that.
I think you're right though, and
go on.
He does. No, I was just gonna say, like, King does that a lot. He breaks a lot of the quote unquote writing rules when it comes to sentence structure and things like that. Like, he just does whatever fits the story. And I remember, as a younger writer, being astounded by that. Like, you can do this, you can break these rules, you can do these different things. And I wouldn't say that I do that all the time, but I do it to it. Exactly. But, if you go back and read his early stuff, he was doing it from the very beginning. And maybe that's why he took a little bit to get published and get that first big deal. But yeah, it's definitely part of his framework.
Yeah, it's always nice when an author has a recognizable style. I like that editors, are there to help shape a novel and to, midwife this thing into existence, something that's going to be, the author's vision plus, palatable to lots of readers. But there are times, especially depending on the publishing house, and I refuse to throw any of them specifically under the bus, but sometimes you can run into a publishing house that edits its younger or newer writers to death. where everything just kind of flattens out and it gets kind of bland. It happens. And so it's nice anytime, whether it's Stephen King or somebody who is newer or new to you. It's nice when you find somebody who has a really sharp sense of their own style. I like that a lot. Here, I'll give you guys, before we get off of writing style and, prose style and all that, let me give you just one line that jumped out to me. And I was like, you know what? I guarantee he grinned and patted himself on the back when he came up with this one, because it's just such a great line. This was so Jonesy has been possessed by Mr. Gray, and we get a lot of time in. So Jonesy has his, like, what Sherlock Holmes would call it, a mind palace, whatever. I can't remember what he calls it, but we're kind of getting him in his own head, getting chased around by Mr. Gray. It's all very bizarre and crazy and fun. But all right. But Mr. Gray is trying to, like, break down this mental door in Jonesy's head. And the line is, Jonesy was once more reminded of the story about the three little pigs. Huff and puff, Mr. Gray, enjoy the dubious pleasures of rage. I was like, there's no way he didn't congratulate himself on that line. Enjoy the dubious pleasures of rage.
And in parentheses, man, that's good storytelling. Good story.
Did you guys
writing.
ever see the Bourne Supremacy? I think it was the third movie in the Bourne trilogy, where the CIA woman goes to meet the CIA guy in the restaurant, and he orders a heart-healthy omelet, and she's like, nothing for me, and she, like, smacks him down, delivers her big line, and then walks away and goes, enjoy your egg whites. And I always thought that was just such a great line, such a good delivery. And so there you go. Enjoy the dubious pleasures of rage. Kind of hits similar. All right. So,
which is funny because didn't he, Mr. Gray later, he talks about how he enjoyed emotion, or enjoyed those emotions well, and how he enjoyed killing, and he enjoyed flesh, and he, all of these things. So the idea that he enjoys rage really comes across as appropriate, I think.
Yeah. All right. So what do we have anything else that we want to bring up from this book? Things that we want to talk about? Just bullet points that came to mind on this latest read through for you, Ryan, or on this first one for you, Ken. I feel like I've had a lot of say so far, so I want to just open the floor.
I actually had quite a few questions going through this as a brand new Stephen King author. But having lived in a world where Stephen King is quite popular, and a lot of his material is kind of in the common space. It felt, even though this is my first reading of any of his books, I felt like I was familiar with a lot of his stuff, because isn't a lot of his writing interconnected, kind of like a Stephen King Cosmere, if you will, if we're talking about Sanderson. He talks about Pennywise. He talks about it. He talks about
same thing.
There are several things that he talks about.
No, that's the one I remember
that were called in other books. Plus, again, Stand By Me. He's got the same thing with four friends who have this dark secret and become lifelong friends, and the kids in it. And I think this references Tommy Knockers and a few others in The Stand and stuff. It feels like, I don't know it feels like a lot of his books are interconnected to me.
No, you're not wrong at all. And I didn't pick up on it when I first read him back in the day, because I was vaguely aware of it. But like I said, I really didn't. I knew Stephen King was a horror writer, and that was pretty much it, and kind of, left it at that. And so, you can enjoy the book without knowing that. But on the read through, having read now most of Stephen King's work, it actually hits you a little bit harder in certain places and has some nice callbacks. But the town of Derry figures prominently throughout the It series and a couple of other books that he has. And he does have this nice interconnected thing. And now, he and his son, Joe Hill, are kind of have references to each other's worlds in their latest books. And so, kind of hopeful to see his sons maybe carry that torch on and continue to build that out. And so, for Sanderson fans, it is, representative of kind of like that Cosmere like experience. And I think it's Easter eggs, but it also is that added layer of depth for sure if you're kind of in on the lingo.
Yeah, once you really get to know everything. The one thing I wish that I'd gotten a reference to that, I feel like I should write him a letter and say, you put all these references into this book, and how dare you leave out the 1986 Stephen King directed masterpiece, and I do mean masterpiece, Maximum Overdrive. I didn't see any references to Maximum Overdrive, and I was a little sad about that. No, I'm with you, Ken. It's like I said, first Stephen King book, but yeah, we've all seen 20 Stephen King based movies, right? So you kind of you get the idea at the very least. So yeah, that makes sense. Okay, yeah. Any other bullet points you guys want to bring up? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just go back and say. Oh yeah, go ahead, Ken.
This delay is fun. This is great. No, Ryan, go for it.
Okay, go for it first, Ryan.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, like, I'd go back to the beginning, and I think, if you're interested in the craft of writing, I think studying those first few open chapters, like what he's doing, is really worthwhile. And how he's kind of pulling these different threads and guiding the reader through, that to me was really big, really stood out to me. And I think, again, not his greatest work, but I do think that the story he's telling lends itself easier to study than some of his other things. So just from that perspective, so if any writers or aspiring writers are listening, I definitely go look at that. And then, I think the other thing was, and I'd kind of forgotten about this, but, he actually does a really good job of tackling toxic masculinity before toxic masculinity was, a thing that had a name. With the kind of these jock bullies that are trying to torture duddits really before the friends intervene. And then harkens it back to the modern day with, the villain character from the military who's, in there just to kill everyone and quiet everything down and, is incapable of feeling and really sees, any sort of emotion as weakness. Again, he tips over into caricature a little bit when we get there. But at the same time, I thought it was really interesting just to see that. And what I liked was, and you don't see this that often, is it really was the story of, 4 dudes who love each other and are, great friends, willing to die for each other and throw it all down. And the last thing that I'll say is that I think the book had a lot to say about kind of that transition into adulthood. These characters are in their late 30s at the book, but like, because they have this shared history together that they reconnect once a year around, it really did feel like kind of that transition from, childhood, high school, adolescence into full on adulthood. And again, I think college age Ryan, I can totally see why that was hitting home with me, because I was, in the midst of that transition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you, with your military service, I'm sure you have some experience with the male camaraderie that is so often lacking in many parts of our culture. We're not allowed to be close. Men aren't supposed to be close and share emotion and, commiserate and all these things. And so, yeah, I've talked about that a lot, even going back to the Lord of the Rings and, Frodo and Sam's relationship or whatever. This comes up every so often, and I'm glad you called it out here, because I think it was a great example of friendship, long-term friendship, and the idea that they all know each other really, really well, and they know that the others are messed up in their own ways. I'm an alcoholic. I'm suicidal. I'm, whatever their different issues are. They all know that the others are messed up, but they're there for them. And they're not being judgmental. They're just, they're, like I said, commiserating. They're being there for each other. I think it's really a valuable thing to represent on the page. So yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. You were saying, Ryan, that, it dips into caricature. I think that's definitely true with the military madman guy. But with the teenage bullies, I would have been tempted to think that was getting too much into caricature until I read more about sociopathy and how it manifests in kids and teenagers. And it is terrifying. And it felt very familiar from what I'd been reading about that sort of thing. And you sometimes come across, kids who are pretty awful. shall we say. So yeah, that part rang plenty true to me. All right, so let me ask you this, Ryan. We'll start wrapping this one up, but let me ask you, if not this one, which Stephen King book, or maybe better yet, if somebody read this book and they were like, hey, I kind of enjoyed parts of this, like we did, but I'm not totally sold on King. Where should they go next?
Yeah, I should have anticipated that question. It's a great question. Yeah, I would say if you hated the book, you're probably not going to like Stephen King. If you like the book, but you're like, like I can see like why this isn't known as his best book, then you should keep reading. I would say, so let me see here. I have a couple of personal favorites, but they're not necessarily where I would recommend starting. I think Bag of Bones is a really good one. It's the story of this author who his wife has passed away. He's one of these guys. He wrote a bunch of books that were trunk novels, and he actually hasn't been able to write since she passed away decades ago. But he's been putting out these old books, and now he's kind of out of books and trying to figure out what to do. And he goes to this lake to try to write and kind of figure things out. And I don't want to give too much away from there, but I'll just say it has a lot of elements of The Shining. So if you're familiar with the movies, has some elements there and some callbacks, but I think it's a really interesting one. And then my personal favorite is this one called Lissy's Story, and it's about a woman who was married to a famous author who died, and they kind of had this secret inner language, but he also had this kind of secret, what she thought was an imaginary world. And she discovers that maybe it wasn't imaginary after all when she's going through his papers a couple years after he's passed away. And he said he wrote that after his accident. He came home from the hospital. I think he was in the hospital for like a month or two. And his office had been transformed into kind of an infirmary, and all of his stuff was in boxes. And it just made him think, if I had died, the same thing would have happened. And what was that like? So those are two books that, if you like this one, I'd suggest checking those out. And if you like those other ones, then I think you'll be hooked.
Right on. I like it. Well, let's call it there on Stephen King's Dreamcatcher. Ryan, thank you for selecting the book, because, like I said, Stephen King kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed, and now somebody came along and said, no, you will read Stephen King. And I did, and I'm glad I did. I enjoyed it. Kenn, you have one final thought?
I wanted to point out one thing that I noticed, considering this book was written in 2001. I thought it was funny that just random coincidence that Owen's wife and daughter were named Katrina and Rita, which were the two hurricanes, in 2005. Like, wow, pick two names, and then just coincidentally those names come back.
It's the Shinnin, boy.
It was just funny to me. I'm like, what? Holy cow! Look at hindsight.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. So, yeah, Ryan, thank you very much for selecting this one. Now, I want to ask you more about The Memory in the Blood, the new book that just came out. Tell us a little bit about it and pitch the series for listeners who might be interested.
Yeah, definitely. So the series is the Fall of the God series. Starts off with The Sin and the Steel, and then the sequel was The Justice and Revenge, and then the conclusion here is The Memory in the Blood. So it's the story of a young woman. She's a street rat, autodidact, who becomes the first private investigator in her world. Her name's Sambukina Bakalhura. She has a partner in crime solving named Eld, who's a suspiciously good swordsman. And the series starts with them getting blackmailed by the most powerful trading company in the world to solve this mystery that empires have failed to uncover. And what they don't realize is that Buck has reverse engineered this so that she can turn the tables on them. And along the way, she'll encounter pirate queens and mages and the undead, and then the gods get involved. And unfortunately for Buck, the gods have plans for her. And unfortunately for the gods, Buck has plans for them. And so the series really is her story of trying to upend her corrupt society because she grew up on the streets. She knows what the powerful are capable of, and she wants to make sure that no one else has to grow up the way she did. So The Memory in the Blood is the final novel in that sequence. It's kind of Buck navigating her life from thinking that she could go it alone to realizing that, it really does take a team to overthrow the existing power structures in the world. And so it's a question of, can she find her found family and pull this ragtag team together in time to face down the gods before, they destroy her and the world around her. And there's a lot more going on than that, but I think that's probably a pretty good primer for folks that aren't familiar with the work. I think the cover quote they went with, and I was happy about this one because I'm a lifelong Gentleman's Bastard sequence fan, is it's like if Scott Lynch wrote Pirates of the Caribbean. So if that sounds interesting to readers, you should probably go check it out.
All right. Okay, I was already in, but now I'm more in. This is awesome.
Yeah, in Ken's case, we might say more on. Thank you, everybody. All right.
What do you mean?
Kenn, I unfairly pick on you too much, and I'm almost sorry about that. I really am. It's so close. So close.
You know what? If I regarded what you thought of me, then it would probably hurt. But I'm just kidding.
No,
it only hurts a little.
So Ryan, the pitch is a good one. I think I especially like the idea of the. It takes a village to overthrow the village elders, right? Like there are things you can do on your own to affect change, but to do it bigly, it requires, generally speaking, more than just you. So yeah, I think that's a great concept, and I hope people go check it out. So the first book again is
The Sin in the Steel, and that came out in 2020.
All right, so
yep.
So
now I saw one review, sorry, Craig, that said that it was a multi-layered attack on adventure tropes. So I'm like, okay, now I'm in.
Cool. Well, the last question for you, Ryan, and this is probably the most important thing that I'll ask you about is, I see a bunch of guitars on the wall behind you. Clearly, you like to play. So what are you playing these days, and what are you listening to these days?
No, it's a great question. I've actually been inspired by Stranger Things, and so looking to resurrect some Metallica. I love hard rock, love all rock in all forms, really. I'm not good enough to play Metallica, but I think I might be good enough to hit the chords in the background while watching Stranger Things and letting Eddie kind of riff over top of me. So as far as listening goes, I'm trying to think, what have I been listening to? Well, I have been listening to Rage Against the Machine because like 3 years ago, before the pandemic, when they said they were going to do their tour, we got tickets and never got to see them, and going to see them in like 2 weeks. So I'm super amped about that. Not my normal everyday listening to, but it's definitely something that teenage Ryan was
you got you have to do that sort of thing when longtime listeners of the show know that I am an irrational fan of Evanescence. It's like that 13-year-old girl inside of me just can't let go of how much I love Amy Lee's music, and she's great. And so they're coming to town. They're coming to Salt Lake in a few months. And I was like, I should get tickets. And my wife was like, hey, I'll go with you. It's not her favorite music, but she's like, I'll go with you. But it's the same kind of thing where it's like, I've never seen them live, and I owe it to my 15-year-old self to just do it, like to just go see them, and so I went to buy tickets, and I called into the other room. I'm like, hey, Sarah, they're touring with Korn. And she's like, we don't have to stay for Korn. Let's just go. so anyway, we'll see. Anyway, I think I would enjoy.
See, I've seen Korn a few times, and they're. I was going to say I've seen Korn a few times, and they're. I don't want to say they're hit or miss because there's going to be some hardcore fans that are going to be really upset with me. But when they're on, they're amazing. And then I've seen them twice where they were like, I don't know, I think maybe they're just burnt out from the tour, and it was not as impactful. But I mean, if Evanescence is on the hard end of what you listen to, Korn.
No. I'm not exactly Drew McCaffrey from Inking Out Loud. I'm not the metal fan that he is, but no, I look, I can rock. Okay. All right. So with that, I don't know, That was a long
Sure.
musical
Okay,
tangent,
yeah.
but let's call it there. Everybody's yelling at their speakers. Why are you still talking about this? So thank you, everybody, for listening. Kenn, thanks for reading along and joining on this author shelf, and especially thank you to Ryan Van Loan. Everybody go check out the new book, The Memory in the Blood. That's part 3 of the series. So yeah, go check out the whole series if you haven't yet. And Ryan, again, thanks for choosing this one, and we appreciate you coming on the author shelf.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. It's been a blast.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And for everybody else, don't forget, thelegendarium.com is where you can find links to Patreon, to the Discord, where you can join in the conversation. Our Discord server is lovely and wonderful, and you should all be there because screw the rest of the internet. Who cares, right? It's all about our Discord server. That's it.
And it has mellow tones like Amy Lee.
So thanks, everybody, and we will see you next time.